Welcome, people. Welcome to session 4. How could it be? Session 4, the final session of the year, to the interactive web series, Engaging All Learners in the Middle Years. We are just so delighted to offer this series in partnership with the Edith Lando Virtual Learning Center and the Rural Education Advisory, and we acknowledge the financial support from the province of British Columbia through the Ministry of Education and Childcare. Today's special guest colleagues are Denise Augustine, Nikki, Lineham, and Christi Livingstone, who are all magnificent educators from British Columbia, and I've had the great fortune to learn with over the last few years and decades, though that was when everyone was still 6. So, we're a young crowd, but a passionate crowd. I'm Leyton Schnellert, and I am your co-host, and I'll pass the torch over to your other co-host, Tammy Renyard.
Good afternoon, everyone. Super excited to be here and welcome everyone. I can't believe that we're already at the end of April and this is our last session for the year. We're sending good things into the universe that we will have, I think, year 7 next year, if we continue this fabulous work together. Ait Squale Siam Siea. Good day, respected friends. I would like to acknowledge that I am Zooming from the traditional territory of the Hulkaminam speaking people. Specifically where my office is the village of Quamatsun. And I was sharing before folks came on that this is a view from the top of Swatkis, which is also known as Mount Prevost. And it's a beautiful site where you can see just across the whole valley. And I'm told that Swatkas is named after the name of a dog that was given to one who fell from the sky. And so just so with such gratitude that I'm here and able to be part of today and share this with you. And again, we're hoping for year 7 next year. And I really want to thank our guests for being here. This dream was to create powerful learning opportunities across the province. And so each time we get together, we all take a little bit away. And the hope is always that better together, we can make a difference for the students that we support and the families we serve. So thank you. Thanks to our guests for being here. And over to you, Leyton.
I live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. And I live here as a settler guest, and I'm really grateful for the knowledge holders and elders who have gifted me with knowledge. And I have come to understand that language and land and culture aren't separate. And so I'm just so grateful for the language that I've learned and how that teaches me about the place and the ways of knowing. And so why? And I can't wait to hang out with this amazing crowd and engage in practices that help us understand our Indigenous learners and all learners, and really to help them thrive and really think about our practice and deepening our practice in ways that are responsive and respectful and really reciprocal at the same time, and how engaging in this kind of practice is working towards truth and reconciliation. Our first guest frolic speaker, also hi Katie and Rudy, I saw you sneak in. Our first guest frolic is Denise Augustine, and Denise has been central in making this series happen. And when she was the superintendent of Indigenous education for the province, she partnered with us to help make this series possible. And so Denise, we're just so happy that you've come back to us and are getting us started with the first part of today's webinar. I pass the torch to my friend Denise.
Thanks, Leyton. Hello, everybody. And it is such a privilege to be here. Really, what I did was I just talked to lots of people about making sure that there were the funds available for this program to keep going. So that was all that I did as a partner. Although I have shown up to a few of these, and I really do, it is nourishing for me. I have the privilege of calling from my home office today here, like Tammy, on the unceded territory of the Hulkaminam speaking people. This is the land of Cowichan tribes, as they're known, or the Cowichan people. And I am grateful. I'm grateful to be able to live in a place where my ancestors have lived for thousands and thousands of years. All right. I have a little bit of time with you. I'm going to talk about a few things, but just before I get started, let me introduce myself. So Antha Put Swealt, my Hulkaminum name is Swealt, and I carry the name of my, in Western terms, we'd say my maternal grandmother's sister, my great aunt, and also my great grandmother. They were also known as Swealt. My great aunt was Irene Griffiths, and my great grandmother, Alice Alec. And you can see a picture of them in the bottom center of the corner of the photo, as well as my great-great-grandmother, who was known as Lucy. Her Hulkaminum name was Lucy. Her English name was Lucy. Her Hulkaminum name was Quatlamat. I'm the daughter of Quatlamat, Jane Marston. You see my mom in the top right corner of your screen here with my youngest brother, John, and David Marston, and that's my dad in the top left corner there with my brother, Luke. I come from a family of visual artists. Most of them are sculptors and weavers, and they're all storytellers. They tell stories with their art. And I chose a different path. I obviously went into education. I've been in education for over 30 years. I'm the mother of 2 grown daughters and I have 2 granddaughters. And it's really now with them that I do in mind that I do this work. You might be familiar with some of my family. The sculpture in the bottom left corner there, you can find in Stanley Park, but you can also find the original wooden sculpture in the Royal Museum in Victoria right now. It's called Shore to Shore. It is a cod lure, and underneath the cod lure are 3 individuals. Our great-great-grandfather, Portuguese Joe, his first wife, Kahultanat, who unfortunately passed away after her second child was born, and then our great-great-grandmother, Quatlamat. It's a longer story. There's actually a documentary made about it, but it's a really beautiful story of what can happen when people of difference come together with open hearts, open minds, seeking love and companionship, and the work that our ancestors did in transforming the fishing industry here on the West Coast. You see an image there of the Truth and Reconciliation box that was also carved by my brother Luke. So that traveled across Canada with the TRC, the commission, and holds artifacts that commemorate the stories of loss and abuse suffered by our ancestors, our relatives who went to residential school, including our grandmother. There's many stories to tell about that. In the center image there is a picture of me when I was about 7 and my brother Mike. And often when I'm talking about things like the 60s scoop, I'll use this image because that's when we grew up. And I remember standing in our yard at the fence line. And in particular, I remember this one time, these 3 or 4 individuals walking by and stopping to ask Michael if he was adopted. Because at that time, First Nation children were being taken away and adopted out to white families. And we look so different. We have the same parents. And so this is also an invitation for all of us to check our assumptions about who's in front of us and how we're engaging with them. In the middle there is my maternal grandmother, who is really important to me and to my story because we have Métis ancestry on my dad's side, and she claimed it. It was one of those secrets that people tried to hide. She claimed it. She also went to university and played lacrosse. So, I take lots of inspiration from my dad's side of the family as well. And then just quickly, the ferry boat on the bottom is a ferry that travels between Vancouver and Galliano, and that is my brother John's artwork that you might be familiar with. Marston is the last name if you want to look them up. Angela, Luke, and John Marston are the most prolific, and my mom and dad. So all of that to say, one of the things that I really would like, a message that I would like to leave with you today is the importance of knowing who we are and where we come from. And that piece is one of the threads that will weave all of this together. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 big ideas: human flourishing, trauma-informed practice, and reconciliation. And then what we might think about as we try to weave those strands together. And those are really, really huge topics. So really my goal today is to offer you a moment to pause and consider how these show up for you in your practice, as I consider how they show up for me in my practice. I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about this idea of human flourishing. And I'm not sure for you all, but when I was working with a ministry and in my continued work with different organizations, this idea of human flourishing and its intersection with education keeps coming up. There's some big research work being done with OECD and Harvard and other organizations taking a look at what is the intersection between that idea of flourishing and education. The Human Flourishing Program, which is hosted at Harvard, published some research, and the research looked at these 5 areas: happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose. What do we wake up with purpose in the morning? Our character, our virtues, and how that plays into our flourishing, and then close social relationships. At the bottom of this slide deck, I've got the links to these, but you could also just Google it and you'll come up to their podcast. They've got a variety of resources. For me, it's a little bit too Christianity focused. It isn't inclusive in the work, this particular program, but the ideas are very rich. They talk about expressing gratitude, and they share a couple of pieces of research that were done. One where a group was asked for once a week to share 5 things that they're grateful for. Another was to every day write down 3 things that went well today, which is what I asked you to do. And what the research has shown is that that activity alone has a significant impact on people's happiness. I can't help but make a connection. We did some cultural work for my daughter, Sky, in February. And with that fresh in my mind, I keep thinking about how gratitude shows up in my family and in my community. I think about going to a First Nation event or a community event, and gratitude is expressed over and over. Everybody's, thank you for coming. Thank you to the cooks for showing for the food. Thank you to the elders for spending time with us. Thank you to all the people who've spoken before me. Gratitude is such a well-taught practice in my family and community, and it's nice to see that it's being reflected in that idea of human flourishing. Another piece that they looked at was this idea of savoring, and savoring is like when you notice something good in a situation and you just hold on to it. So we think about savoring with food, right? You take a bite and you just really notice how that pleasurable taste impacts your senses. I can't help but think of my mom and how she would stop in the middle of the conversation and get us all to literally smell the roses, or take a look at right now, the dogwood tree is blooming outside, and several times a day I pause and just am grateful and savor that idea of the dogwood flowers that will soon be gone and making room for whatever's next. Again, what the research showed is building that practice of savoring created more happiness for folks, a happiness and satisfaction in life. I can't help but think, and I know Leyton will appreciate this story, and I apologize, Leyton, if I've told it before, but it's like a highlight of my career. I spent many years as a elementary music teacher, and I would do a big unit on percussion, and we would create, drum circles and percussion circles, and really trying to get kids to listen for the spaces between the notes. And it was at one particular grade 2-3 class, and we were in the circle, and side note, the secretary wasn't very far down the hall, and she would pray for this unit to be over every year because she could hear it all bad all year long, or for the whole unit. And we started one instrument at a time, started with like the bass xylophone, with just going back and forth, and kept adding one instrument. And the kids were getting really good at just adding their little bit of flavor and not filling up the whole space. And then the whole group was in the groove. And for musicians, that's like magic. Everybody is hitting the beats and the notes, and you could see their eyes light up, and they kept going, and many looked at me, and I was in awe as well. And then we just stayed there. Nobody said anything. We just savored that moment of everybody being in sync. And we couldn't replicate it. The next day we tried. We couldn't get it again, but that moment was worth savoring. Another piece that has come up in this research around human flourishing is the idea of imagining one's best possible self. So thinking about your life in the future, what do you want that to be? Imagine as though everything has gone well, and that you've worked hard, you've achieved success. What does that look like? And as I was reflecting on this, I was thinking, we do this for kids a lot. But how often do we actually hold space for ourselves to do that work? I'm just going to highlight a couple more pieces that we're learning through this idea of flourishing, is using character strengths. So a particular piece of research took a survey and had folks identify their 5 central character traits, and then use one of those traits every day in a new way. So really, that idea of picking what you're good at and practicing it. And I also can't help but think about my life in my family, my extended family, my community, and how that is just expected. People are looking to see what your strengths are, and then giving you opportunities to use that strength frequently in different scenarios. What they noticed is that those folks had higher levels of happiness, even as much as 6 months later after they did this activity. Random acts of kindness, we know, have a positive impact on our happiness, and volunteering, which also we see in many communities. I see it in my community as well, as an expectation. People are expected to show up for community meetings, or to participate in cultural work, and to use your gifts, to use whatever your gifts are in community as often as possible. Not exclusive to First Nation communities, for sure. The other pieces that they studied, I'm not going to talk about though, are close social relationships. And I think educators, perhaps more than many people, understand the positive impact of having close social relationships, and how that can affect learning, that sense of well-being. We often say, and sometimes perhaps not thinking it through deeply enough, it all starts with relationship. A kid will work harder for me if he knows that I care about him and that I'm going to go to bat for him, than if he's just feels like just another kid sitting in front of me. So something just to wonder about is, how do we know when our learners in front of us are flourishing? And then what about kids who come in with trauma? Like, it's one thing to think about those kids that you can nurture along these ways, but what about the kids who come in with behaviors that show us that there's lots going in their life that they don't have control of, and that are having really hard impacts? So that leads me into, I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma-informed practice, and I'm going to refer you to this mytrainingbc.ca. Our friend Deb is here in the room, who did some work on this resource, matching the curricular competencies to the these sections of trauma-informed practice. Suggest that you go and take a look at it. Deb, the work you did was amazing. It's very comprehensive, and much gratitude to you. And Linda O'Neill might be someone else that you all know that did lots of work on this resource. It's hosted on the ministry, one of the ministry websites. Trauma-informed practice is that idea of, and probably all of you in the room know this as well, if not better than me. So just perhaps indulge me in bringing it to the surface of this conversation. It's the compassionate approach. It's seeing each learner who comes through our door as a whole human. It's trauma-informed practice is different than trauma specific, because that's, you know, then we want specially trained psychologists and so on to help with that. This is more global. With trauma-informed practice, we lift everybody up. And it also, I'll just emphasize, and I'll come back to this, it also starts with ourselves. I need to know, what are my triggers? Who am I, and what is the place in history that I'm coming from? Recent and, you know, for me, multi-generational, that I might be bringing into the room. What do I know about how I keep myself calm, and so that I can show up best for the kids? I can't help but remember a time that I was being scolded by the Indigenous Ed team, and reminded that it is our job as educators, as humans working with children, to make sure that we have done our work before we go put ourselves in front of them, because when we want to protect them from whatever we might be bringing in. And so we did some work around what are those practices, the spiritual practices, the other practices that we use to keep ourselves healthy so we can show up for our children in the best way possible. The trauma-informed practice is a reminder that all behavior and actions happen for a reason, and they provide us information. I've been speaking with a young man lately, and who described himself as broken. And I said, I don't think you're broken. I think you have developed behaviors that in the past have worked for you, and you're in a place now that you don't need those behaviors anymore. And so when we're able to see the child or the human underneath the behavior and understand that we might not know everything that they're coming to school or into our rooms with, helps us to show up with more compassion. I have also talked to educators about, you know, when they're frustrated with, and folks in the ministry even, you know, they're in a meeting with a First Nation person who reacts in an inflammatory way to something that's said. And I just we need to remember to be patient and listen deeply, to remain open-hearted and curious. So for instance, there was one individual at the ministry who were across the table from often. And my reminder to folks was, this system has forced her to come as a warrior every day. Every day she comes to a meeting, she has to come as a warrior. And so how come today we expect her to come differently? That skill has got her to where, you know, doing this work that we're doing today. And it'll take time to unwind that. And just even that, just being able to come with an open heart, diffused things and created space for better work together. Think about, are there connections that you're making to what I'm hearing? Is it are you having oh yeah, I remember? Or I'm just going to pause for a moment. I'm almost done. I'm going to try really hard to be done on time. The third part of the weave that I'm going to offer today to put on the table is this reconciliation. What again is reconciliation? Why are we still talking about it? Which is probably one of the most common questions I'm hearing right now. Is, to me, people are saying, why are we still talking about this? Are we not done? Can we we have other things we need to be focusing on? Do we still need to be focusing on reconciliation? And so I just want to offer a couple of words. And these are really the words of Justice Murray Sinclair. He has reminded us that for 7 generations, Indigenous people, children, small children, were taken and put into schools where we were taught that our beliefs, our cultures, our way of seeing the world were less than non-Indigenous. We were taught that our ancestors and our relatives were heathens, and we were encouraged to leave all of those pieces of ourselves behind and become more non-Indigenous for 7 generations. So let's just think about that idea for a moment. Okay, I'm going to go over 4 o'clock. I talked about my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my great-great-grandmother. And then if I talk about my daughter and my granddaughter, we're almost at 7 generations. That's a long time. And at that same time, non-Indigenous people were going to school and being taught the same thing, that my language, my culture, my ancestors, my family traditions were not as good as non-First Nations in my case, and that I should leave them behind. We were all taught that. It's going to take us a few generations, not a few years, not a few decades, a few generations to really get us to a place where we can stand shoulder to shoulder and be good neighbors to each other. So many other things to say. Okay, weaving it all together. So if you think about that idea of flourishing, and I talked about made connections to First Nations practice of gratitude and savoring. I would add in there prayer and song of how we're in relationship. You know, in my community, we sit and share food before we do any work because we want to foster good relationship first. That idea of approaching our teaching experience, our teaching practice from a trauma-informed lens, also similar practices. To me, I don't know, like hopefully it's transparent to you all, but to me it's like glaringly obvious that our Indigenous relatives and neighbors have some things to offer us as we strive to create learning environments where children can flourish and are seen in a healthy way. I'm not going to stay here, but offer one thing you want to remember, one thing you want to learn more about, and one thing you want to do to bring yourself closer to flourishing, because it really starts with you. It starts with me and it starts with you before we even get to the kids. And then I'll send this out so you have some links.
Thanks, Denise. It's always good stuff. We are so grateful, Denise, that you came and spent some time with us and set the stage for our exploration of flourishing and really thinking about how trauma-informed practice is both about knowing our kids and being in relationship with them, but also it's about ourselves and being in relationship with ourselves. I'm now going to pass the torch over to my colleague and teaching partner, Christi Livingstone.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for that, Denise. Some things that you mentioned that I've been thinking about. So I'm going to try to share my slides here. As Leyton mentioned, we are frolics. I am very grateful to be joining today from the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. I have a lot of gratitude for the Coquitlam and have been doing a lot of learning myself about just their art and their history and their story as people. Their name means red fish up the river, and their story of resilience is one that really inspires me to just learn more about not only the people, but the place where we live. And so I have a lot of gratitude to the Coquitlam for just their continued care of the land and the waters here. Some other things that I wanted to mention, I started my my learning in Montessori, so that really kind of anchors my pedagogy, and I think a lot of that pedagogy contributes to how I approach learning in community with my students and learning in like multi-grade groupings and that sort of thing. And I have done some work in contemplative approaches to education and also lots of work in restorative practice. So that really kind of informs my approach as well. And then I've spent the last 3 years joyously alongside Leyton, working with the middle years teacher candidates, and it has been such a pleasure to do that work and grow with all these wonderful people alongside Leyton, of course. So that's a little bit about me. I thought it might be helpful to just consider some things that I see as a classroom teacher in middle school around the impacts of trauma. Just things that, like, what it might look like. So thinking about impacts on academic learning and how I often will see like a reduced that reduced capacity for just cognition. I notice when my students are um, not sleeping very well. I can tell that they've been, they're showing up without having a great sleep. Um, and I recognize that trauma and um, just poor circumstances can lead to making it harder for them to learn, making it harder for them to remember things, and also that reduced language capacity as well. And then I think with middle schoolers in particular, where the trauma, the impacts of trauma really show up in a kind of a glaring way is the impacts on social functioning. Middle schoolers are so awkward already, and trying to like figure out how to have these social connections and who they are. And so when attachment difficulties make that problematic for them to make friends, or when they're seeking a lot of control, or they're not able to establish those strong peer relationships, it really becomes obvious that they need some extra support and some extra care in making those connections. So just kind of thinking about those impacts a little bit. And then talking to Denise a few days ago, this idea of flourishing kind of just sat with me for a little bit. And so I've spent the last 8 years before I was in this position with Leyton, working at Scott Creek Middle School. And um, this picture, like, just I was leaving the school one day and I was like, oh man, like this is it, this is like paradise where I've worked and where such amazing things have happened. So I just, like, it captured this idea of flourishing and being in favorable conditions so well. And in a middle school classroom, I really developed a lot of strategies to create an environment for students. It was a lot more challenging for me to do that with middle years learners than it was for the kindies that I learned with, and the littles that just instantly accepted everything I had to say. And so yeah, just that effort to create those favorable conditions for middle years learners was very different. So kind of coming back to those guideposts that Denise was talking about, that first piece for me around understanding is just really getting to know who are my learners when they come into the classroom. And so the getting to know you that I'm sure many people are familiar with from Leyton's work is something that is very helpful at the beginning of the year, just to invite students to share a little bit about who they are. I also do this activity with using the Matchbox Diary as a kind of an anchor text, where I invite students to go home and talk to people in their life about what some artifacts are that represent their history and the literacies that they're bringing into the classroom, and invite them to share artifacts that they might like to share with the group. So the book, if you've never read it before, is about a little granddaughter who goes and is visiting with her grandfather, and he has this cigar box, and in it are many little matchboxes, and each matchbox has an artifact in it, and they're all stories that that the grandfather tells to the granddaughter. Beautiful book. But it's kind of an invitation for students to just have those conversations with family and friends and people in their lives, and bring things in that have meaning for them. So that is all kind of contributing to this understanding. And I think that just as as we've already heard, that understanding is kind of the key to intervention. It's the first piece, like approaching students with compassion and thinking about having empathy and giving that to them right off the get-go, so that we can just learn from them and invite everything that they want to share with us into the room. So this next piece around relationships, I have some images here that I wanted to share. Building relationships in middle school is just remembering to be playful. And so I think that these images really capture that. A lot of time definitely is spent learning about, like, what are our values together and co-creating things together. But a lot of it is just like, let's play. Let's figure out how to make something work. Let's experiment. Let's create something together. And I think I spend a lot of time in September and October just really creating space for those playful moments. And I do quite a lot of circle practice, especially at the start of the year, all year for sure. But circles really offer a forum for us to co-create those shared values and have that shared space, and understand, like, who we are as a community of learners. The connection piece, I think, is for me, has been about connecting to place and helping students connect to place. And again, bringing in things from home. And then more recently, in learning from some of the work that other teachers are doing, really using the core competencies to connect with parents and families, and asking families to share what they know about students' strengths and in relation to the core competencies right at the beginning of the year and throughout the year. So just inviting that collective knowledge into the room a little bit more, and connecting to place, trying to make those connections to community. So all of this to say that with middle years learners, a lot of what I'm trying to do is build connections. Part of it is connecting to identity and giving them access to their personal history. Part of it is helping students make sense of the world and connecting to what they know. And part of it is connecting them to metacognition and thinking skills. Some supportive structures that you might see in a middle school classroom, those co-created charters, trying not to have a bunch of busy space, having some consistent routines, flexible seating, visuals, all these things kind of supporting the connection piece and the relationships. And then in terms of capacity, what really stands out for me is that co-regulating piece and knowing what keeps me calm and being able to meet my students with that calm as well. This little book, Sitting Still Like a Frog, has like a CD that goes with it, and it's just got these little contemplative practices, breathing techniques that you can listen to. And the Calm app has some great stuff. There's actually like some athletes in there that have real appeal to the middle school boys who might be a little more reluctant to close their eyes and breathe with me. But when they hear it from an athlete, they are more likely to try it out. And just that talking about like how, you know, breathing and calming yourself is not just something we're doing in class. It actually has power for you, and it actually gives you some increased abilities, and that usually helps with the buy-in. So some co-regulation strategies, just kind of a refresh, making it explicit, that modeling regulation, validating needs and feelings, providing comfort and reassurance, checking if basic needs are being met, providing really clear boundaries. I think there's a temptation sometimes with older kids to like be a little bit more loose, but I know that the more I have clear boundaries, the safer my kiddos feel, and the better we understand each other. So that's a huge important thing. And you know, that Montessori philosophy always kind of underscores that idea of like freedom, having freedom within limits, and knowing when you know where the edges are, then you can feel safe to experiment within that space. Leyton, it's our favorite graphic. So I wanted to just come back to this and share an activity that I do that is hopefully I have a little bit of time, that is kind of connected to these pieces of middle years philosophy, and comes from a trauma-informed space. So developing identity, I would argue that the 30 months of middle school are all about developing identity, and you know, doing it in ways that you can sneakily insert the curriculum is kind of my MO. So this is one of those things. A little quote from the middle years book there. So this is inspired by some work that I did in my master's program with Dr. Vicki Kelly, and she introduced this idea of métissage as a way to inquire into your personal history and kind of weave these parts of yourself together. I talk about this usually with learners first because it's an opportunity to introduce the idea of the Métis sash and share that with learners as well. So this is what the project looks like. We create these timelines of students' lives, and eventually they line the walls in the hallways or in the classroom, and share stories of who we are as a community in the form of cross-section of a tree. The sneaky teaching, here's where the sneaky teaching comes in. It does actually connect to curriculum in lots of ways. So I can connect it to significance with social studies. I can connect it to writing and design with language arts. I can connect it to observations and data and science. And I can connect it to estimations and circles in math. So we start with kind of a tree study. So we're actually looking at trees, and then we go into understanding significance and what does it mean for something to be historically significant. Lots of poetry skills and literacy skills integrated into this kind of overall unit. And then learning about circles, as I mentioned, diameter, circumference, interview skills, and looking at different kinds of historical information, and then constructing timelines. So when they put it all together, they create this fingerprint poem that is the pith of the tree, and that is words that they come up with themselves, or they ask friends to describe themselves, and it's just a collection of words that makes up who they are. And as they're searching through their history, sometimes they are asking friends and family to discover who they are, who they were at 1 year old, or who they were at 6 months old. And sometimes they're looking up what was happening in the world when they were 6 months old. Really important to give kids lots of options so that they don't feel like, if they don't have a lot of people to ask, they're out of options. They can turn to an entirely historical project, or they can turn to what is the general progression of a life. So just giving them lots of space to create who they are and their identity in the rings of the tree. And just I wanted to mention that assessment is not like the tree at the end. The assessment is like happening the whole way through. The tree at the end is really not assessed at all. It's just an expression of who they are. And so that content and competencies are assessed over time throughout the project. Yeah, I feel like I must be at my time. So, but I
You
can
have a
share these slides.
whole 5 minutes left, Christi.
Okay, hooray. Okay, well, this is just kind of like a recap in terms of like what offering these activities looks like in my middle school classroom. And throughout the time that I'm doing an activity like that, I'm remembering that our space is connected, and that I've already established all these other things. I already know who my students are. We are already in relationship with one another. We are already a learning community. This is not something I would start the school year with. I'm doing this, probably in January or later, once we all know each other. And I just am continuing to understand who my kiddos are, manage my reactions, and be that co-regulator, helping students comply. I see you need help with this thing. Can I help you with that, please? And then offering that structure and consistency with the firm boundaries. Yeah, I think the conversation about consequences is sometimes a bit tricky, but I talk a lot with particularly grade 8s about what are natural consequences and why they're important. Especially sending them off into high school, where I'm like, guess what? You're going to have to face these natural consequences. So what are they for us in this space? And let's stick to them. Yeah, maintaining those connections. And this is a big one, that time in instead of time out. Like, time out is such a, like, it's another rejection for some kids. And so spending time with them and making sure that you're really preserving that relationship is so key. And then the kids who are compliant and quiet, those are the ones that I try so hard to connect with, like every day, every chance I get. Just like, what is the thing that makes those kids tick? And approaching consequences from that restorative lens. So, how can you make things right? And how can you give kids the autonomy and the ability to make them right? And structuring choices to make sure that students feel in control. Avoiding praise, but giving lots of positive reinforcement. I definitely don't want my students to be thinking that they have to please me, but I do want them to know when they're doing something well. And then supporting parents and caregivers. I know sometimes it can be tricky to communicate with parents, especially it seems like in middle school that there is a little bit more separation. but just trying to reach out as much as you can to families and approaching those conversations with understanding and compassion. And don't be tempted to move too far out of the role of teacher. Sometimes we want to do more than we can do, and knowing that we have to have our own oxygen mask on, and make sure that we are being restorative ourselves, and maintaining our role as teachers so that we can be that consistent and safe space.
Excellent recap. There you go, Christi.
I'm at the end. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Christi. We so appreciate you. I'm going to pass the torch next to our good friend, Nikki Lineham.
It's Rachel. Hello, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us and sticking with us this long. Nice to see a few familiar faces and lots of new faces as well. So my name is Nikki Lineham. I am zooming into you from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples and Wasanich Nation, and also known as Victoria. And I just wanted to share a wee little bit about myself. So I'm a settler here on these lands, and about 3 generations in, all my ancestors come from Scotland, Ireland, England, France, Germany. And my grandfather, my late grandfather, Chester Johnson, was the first person to teach me how to garden. And this garden you see here is my backyard, but it's not due to me. It's actually due to my husband, John. I married a man who is eerily similar to my grandpa in many ways, in really good ways. And I'm learning to cultivate patience as much as cultivating beautiful vegetables, because it's something of a struggle for me. I've lived my life very cerebrally, and part of my learning that I'm doing, not just the history of the lands, but is actually learning to be on and with land, and not up here. So I wanted to share that with you. You also see my family there. That is my heart and my system. This is an old picture. We haven't all been together in a long time. There's 2 new babies that have been added since this, and a few new dogs. So I didn't want to leave them out, but I just don't have photos of us all together. Over on the left there is Dr. Linda Ferruto. So she is my ethnomathematics mentor, and she's become a dear friend of mine as well. And on the bottom left, there's me and my husband, John, and some of our ethnomathematics students and educators, and that is in Hawaii off the west shore of Oahu. And then one of the activities we did with our ethnomath symposium participants this year was to create a cultural map of where we are in our current work. So that's what you see there is the beginning work there. So I've been a mathematics teacher for 24 years, and I started off my career very much, I would say, old school traditional. It's all I knew, it's all I'd ever experienced. And over the years, I shifted to incorporate a lot more hands-on learning, a lot more meaning and context. And then in 2018, when I took the postgraduate certificate in ethnomathematics, everything made a very sharp turn for me, because I started to actually understand how culture and worldview impact the choices I make as a teacher, as well as how my students are learning. I'm still very much a learner in those things, and spent a few years doing some doctoral studies before I decided to jump out of academia and back into working alongside my colleagues. So I'm bringing with you, or bringing with me, that work to share with you today. So I'm going to be talking about a few different pieces. Oh, I wanted to mention this book because Denise kicked us off, and thank you for your stories and sharing, Denise. There is a book called Mathematics for Human Flourishing, which I highly recommend. And if you've read it, hopefully you'll see some links with what I'll be sharing today. And I'm going to be connecting. I took some notes, both Christi, and thank you for your sharing. Actually, I'll start with that. I want to, just because I know I'll forget otherwise. Christi, I loved the artifacts. I do an activity where I invite students to bring in a math artifact. So what that means is it's an artifact from their culture as well, but they also have to explain either where the math lives within it or the mathematical thinking in creating that artifact. And so it gets them to start seeing that math is all around us, so we can put a little numeracy lens on that. And then also with their interviewing, there's a fabulous, excuse me, elder interview in the Finesc, the First People's Math resource, that you can download for free from Finesc. And I've used that elder interview quite a bit with students, where they interview someone in their community, a grandparent or community member, but the questions are specifically mathematical, but it's extremely eye-opening for all of us. So I'm going to ask you to think of a time, and I will ask you to pop this into the chat. So when we think about collaborating, when was a time where you had a really lousy group learning experience? I can think of many. Most of mine reside in high school, where I was the person who ended up doing all the work because I actually cared about my grade, and some of my group members did not, and I was really diligent. And when was a time you had a great group learning experience? You were in that groove, you might even use that word, flourishing, you lost track of time, you know that what you created was better than what you could have done alone. And then what made the difference for you? Yeah, thanks, Leyton. When we're acknowledging and we're using our sort of unique gifts and talents, and we'll tie back in. So even if you just have some ideas in your mind, keep this there. And what I'm leading into is the use of collaborative math groups. The style of collaboration that I've been using now for, I don't even know, several years is called complex instruction. I hate the name because it sounds complex and difficult. It's not. It comes from this book called Designing Group Work, and it was designed as an equity pedagogy. It's also very much a trauma-informed pedagogy. And we could spend a whole day on this. So I'm going to give you like the Cole's Notes version. And thank you. I love all these responses. And I'm hoping that you'll see some similarities. Yeah, relationships, respect, shared understanding, trust, communication, difference. Yes. One of my favorite aspects about our Ethnomath Symposium is it always is multi-generational, because we invite folks who are coming to bring their families, because many of them need to. And we also invite elders from each of the communities. So our youngest member ever has been 6 weeks old, and our eldest member was 80 in that same symposium. And we had all the ages in between, and it just lends to the most beautiful learning experience that's kind of different from any other conference I've been to. So getting back to our groups, what these are, and this isn't just group work. This isn't just go like group up in 3 and go. And I'm going to talk about the difference. But what I have found with them is it creates a sense of safety. That is done by creating group norms, which we co-create. Christi alluded to that as well. And it's also the shared responsibility. So one of the pieces when we're working, and I have to remind students all the time, especially in our culture, which tends to be very individualistic, and in mathematics, which, let's be honest, has created so much trauma for so many people on its own. A lot of kids, they just want to race to the finish. Like, it's so much like, I'm done, I got the answer. Like, there's this like mad dash. So what I'm constantly having to remind them, until they really get it and they feel it, is that no one's done until everyone in the group has a level of understanding. This isn't about completion quickly. It's about working together and moving the group forward. And it's a shift, because all of a sudden they're not just responsible for themselves and their understanding, but they're responsible for the others in their group. It also gives them, there's empowerment, their voice must be heard. And one of the roles, that's part of their job, and I'll talk to the roles in a moment, to make sure that every voice is heard. And sometimes that voice is in the form of a picture. It doesn't even have to be a verbal voice, but it has to be a contribution. And we also, in these groups, the whole goal is to come up with multiple different solutions and multiple different pathways to the answers that we're getting. So it's not about just like getting one answer and having it the right answer. It's about really getting creative, and it's about digging into and playing with the mathematics, which is how we develop strong mathematical thinking. The other piece that I see happens with these groups is it builds this really beautiful community where, again, the focus is on interdependency, which as opposed to a Western worldview culture where it's really about independence, which is a total myth because we're all interdependent. I don't know anyone that's out there that's like, even eating all the food that they capture, right? Like it's so interdependency is really the truth. It's more of just honoring and raising that up. And back to I can't even remember if it was Christi or Denise, or maybe you both said it, but it's really about seeing that every single group member has strengths and gifts and talents that they bring. And to be very clear, some of those gifts and strengths are not mathematical and they're not academic. And they are very important and they deserve to be acknowledged and valued. And I have seen students who are those students who, we might not consider super academic, but they have this beautiful ability to be like the glue of a group. They can sense when a student is feeling a little bit demoralized or frustrated with the math and they need a little bit of a boost. And they can, when someone's getting a little too bossy pants or taking over, they have a really great way of sort of bringing them down, slowing them down to make sure that everyone is having some understanding. That skill set is something that we can acknowledge and honor. If I want to be directly relating it to our curriculum, which we can, it's those core competencies. So it is still all very related, but to me, it's more about like these life skills that we're developing. And the other great thing is, and this is my approach to math teaching in general, is mistakes are normalized and valued. We cannot learn without making mistakes. And for some reason, math out of all subject areas has become this subject of performance where we're not allowing enough time for those messy mistakes and for taking the wrong path. Even with problem solving, it's really hard to watch students spend 10 minutes going this way solving a problem when that mathematically what they're doing isn't correct, but it's valuable for them to take that path so that they can reroute and figure it out. So it's about giving some time and space for that as well. And within these groups, this group work, we can't just give them a worksheet. They won't work together anyways. So we want to make sure that they have visuals, manipulatives to work together with, so that they can discuss and talk about their ideas. If we can be outside, I love doing measurements. This is where we're figuring out our meter strides, these guys are, and then they're going to be using those meter strides to estimate and create different polygons outdoors. And again, if we can get them moving their bodies, this again is using string to create different shapes, which also ties in spatial reasoning, which is something that I think we really underutilize in math and we really need to be doing more of. So within these groups, the first thing we want to do is co-create that criteria. So I started that a little bit with you. I sort of asked you what was the difference between a good group and a good group experience and a bad one for you. But what I start with is I give students 2 different color sticky notes and I ask them to write this down, and then we bring them up and we put them up front. So they don't have their name on them, but in one color it's all the things that I really like and that I would need from my group while working together. And they often say things like, I don't want someone to laugh at me. I need time to think without being rushed. I don't want someone talking over top of me. I don't want someone bossing me around. And then we ask, what do you not want? Like, what are things that are not going to help you? And again, that like they'll talk about, I don't want to be interrupted. And they're pretty good at what they want and don't want. And sometimes at the very beginning, they don't have a lot to say. So we do this at the first. Then we do some collaborative work. And after they've worked together, they start getting very clear on what they like and what they don't like. So we revisit. So over time, we build this criteria. And then after a few weeks of this, we come together with these agreements. So this was one class. This is from Joy Nugent's class. This was a few years ago with a grade 6 class at a school in School District 61. And these were, after brainstorming, this is what they came up with as a group. So this collaboration criteria looks different for every group I've ever worked with, but there's a lot of common threads. And it lives up in the classroom for the rest of the year, but we can alter it as needed. And sometimes we do. Sometimes we just need to refer back to it as a reminder. And to be clear, this is all coming from the students. So it's not a teacher. The teacher is facilitating and asking the questions. The students are deciding what's working for them because they're the ones that are working in the group. Now, once we do this, we would think, great, now they're going to be in their groups and they're working well. No. Many times they need to be explicitly, they need explicit lessons on how to work well together. So first thing I like to do is I call out what great collaboration looks like. So as they're working, I set a little timer and I'm going around literally with a clipboard and a piece of paper, and I'm listening and I'm looking. So I'll call it, and then I'll stop us after 5 minutes. And I'm like, wow, shout out to this group over here. I'm like, look at how they're sitting. Because honestly, sometimes they'll all sit with like 4 kids in a row and they're just like mutely sitting like this. They're not even looking at one another. So, maybe they're huddling together. Great. They're doing, they're showing that they're collaborate with their bodies, that they're working together. I always listen for someone who's brave enough, because we know it takes a lot of courage in a middle school classroom to say, I don't understand what you're doing. So I'm going to shout out that. I'm not going to say their name. I'm just going to say someone in this group. I'm going to be listening for and looking for groups where I see them including all people. Again, one of the roles is someone to be asking, and I give them prompts, not just, hey, Leyton, do you understand this? Because Leyton's probably going to say, yeah, even if he doesn't. So there's a prompt where they say, hey, Leyton, can you explain in your own words how you're understanding this? And I give those prompts to the students. And for those French immersion, write them out en français so that they have something. So once I call out, what I'm doing there is I'm giving them exemplars for the behaviors of collaborating, because they don't come with this organically often. It depends. Different cultural groups tend to be better at collaborating in schools than others, is what I've noticed. So we often have to really support that process. Once they get going and they're gelling, this is by far the best way of teaching I've ever found. So again, just to come back to it, we are solving problems creatively. We're using as many different ways as possible, and we're ensuring that all group members have some understanding of the solutions. Do I expect them all to have the same level of understanding? No, right? That's just not, they're not robots, they're children. So I'm just looking to see that no one is either ducking out or that is taking over. And the roles to me are key for this. And what I found, I just did this yesterday in a class in Souk School District. It was a grade A class. They've never worked in structured groups before, but they've been working in groups and had already created criteria for collaboration. So the new piece for them were these roles. I prefer groups of 3. I like structured partner talk as well. And then I usually move into groups of 3. I used to do 4, but I found 3 tends to work the best for this age group. So the first role is organizer. And again, I'm my email's on here. So if you would like me to send you all of this printed out, I'm happy to fire that off to you. I just didn't want to put 400 words on this page. The organizer is the person who's in charge of making sure that everyone understands the math task before we get started, so you don't have one kid that's finished before another one has even read the question. And they have a list of prompts that support them in doing this role. The next person is the resource facilitator. They are the person who can go get all the materials you need, the manipulatives, the graph paper, what have you. They also are the only person in the group who's allowed to ask the teacher for help. And they're only allowed to ask if no one else in the group knows the answer. This is what frees you up as the teacher to go in and actually sit with and support groups as needed. Because those questions that you normally get as in math class, where you've got like 6 kids that have their hand up when you've just, you give them something to do and there's like 6 that are like, I don't get it. And by the time you get through those 6, there's another 6 that are like, I'm done. And it's like a whack-a-mole game that you can't really ever get out of. So this allows you to, it like creates a sense of calm, but it also allows you to go more where you're needed, because they're getting that peer support. And because they know that it's not a race to the finish, it's about getting everyone along. It really supports that. And then the other role is the reporter. They're not the only person to write things down, but their role at the end, with the guidance of their group, is to compile and decide which of the solutions they're going to showcase at the end. And they'll share out with their group standing with them, and their group is allowed to jump in and support them as they go. So here's an example of a task. This is the one we did yesterday. So folks, before you all jump off, I'm not going to put you in breakout groups to do this, and there's a reason for that. And I think that's like what Denise and Christi have spoken to already, is every time I've tried this with teachers, people just leave the room. You all abandon ship. Why do you do that? You panic. Sometimes it's because you're listening to this while you're making dinner for your families, and I get it. You're like, I'm not like, I'm chopping onions over here. And sometimes it's because you do not feel safe all of a sudden being asked to do a math task with people you've never met. So that's exactly how our students feel. So I'm not going to do it to you because I don't do it to them. I give lots of time to build this trust with them. And by the way, I don't use this task as a first go. I use a very a non-curricular task like the cupcake sharing task from Peter Lildehall. But here's one for us to think about mathematically. What I would ask you to do, if you're feeling like playing math with me today, is jot down a solution or pop it into the chat. And here's the deal. There's lots of right answers to this. It's a would you rather, so it can't be wrong. So let's take a look. We've got these two choices. By the way, this comes from the website wouldyourathermath.com. Do not use the wouldyourrather.com. It's grossly inappropriate. So it's would you rather math. It's very different. Okay, so here's our two choices. I've got 8 Skittles from the vending machine for 25 cents. By the way, none of the kids knew about those machines, the old school ones. You all do. You stick the quarter in and you turn the thing and you get your little handfuls, usually in restaurants. Or you can get 62 Skittles from a bag of Skittles. It also gives you the weight there, 61 grams, for $1.16. So which would you rather and why? And you can have 2 different answers, thinking about it 2 different ways. You can have the same answer, but multiple ways of justifying it. Putting your math teacher hat on, what concepts might be connected to this? How could we pull this into some people I can see are like, you're doing the math, you're doing the what's the best deal. So the same thing happened. Pretty much the whole group was like, they were on the track of, okay, well, obviously, they didn't say obviously, they did the math and they were like, well, the bag is a way better deal. So then I had to push them a little bit. And I said, okay, in what world would you choose the 8 Skittles for 25 cents? And we got some really good results. So one student got up and he said, well, sometimes you just might want a little bit of munchy munch, just a little bit. And I was like, yeah, for sure. Sometimes you don't need the whole bag. You just want a little bit. Had a couple that said, I just don't want that much sugar. Not one of them, which I thought was interesting, because I went back to my childhood where my parents were really strict about sugar and candy, but I really loved it. So I did a thing, which I probably shouldn't share, but I used to hunt for change. So it was usually in a couch cushion, but the odd time my hand may have made its way into like my dad's coat pocket hanging by the door. And if I found some change, I went to the candy store, and I swear that's how I've developed such good numeracy, was because I really I could tell how many 1 cent, 3 cent, 5 cent candies I could buy. But if you only had a quarter, maybe you want 8 Skittles instead of no Skittles. So point is, when we're working with a task like this, one of the groups who was very math phobic, and they were silent for like 5 straight minutes with a couple kids writing things down, but they wouldn't communicate. And they finally started getting going. And the solution that they shared was, I would choose the 8 Skittles because there's less packaging. It's less waste of plastic. So all responses are valid. I wasn't saying find the best deal. That was something I hoped some would do, because this was the introduction to a unit on rates. We hadn't taught them anything about rates. We wanted to see what they already might have known. And we also wanted to give them a task that was really open and allowed for every single student to say something, right? It didn't have to have a math backing. This group decided, like, we're worried about garbage. We're worried about plastic waste. So thinking about, like, how is an approach like this more trauma informed than here's your textbook, here's your worksheet with 35 questions on finding the unit rate. So it's quite a shift. And having them in their groups, what the teacher said was with the roles, she's like, they were way more focused and on task than they've ever been in their groups before. So she's absolutely going to keep using them. And she also said she heard voices that she doesn't normally hear. So, and that was just in one go. And by the way, it was a learning round. So these poor grade 8 students had 16 teachers standing around watching. So I don't even know what it would look like normally, but they definitely jumped right in, and they took their roles very seriously, and they wanted to make sure every voice was heard. And the reporters were like, hey, I have to share something out. Like, I need you all to say something. So it allowed for that sort of participation. I'm keeping my eye on the time here. This is where you might get to, and this might then be your performance task. This is something that you might want to assess. The first one was an introduction. We haven't actually done anything with rates yet. And then you might be able to give something like this towards the end or in the middle, which is a better deal, prove it visually and numerically, right? So it's the same type of idea, but you can use it at different points throughout your exploration. I'm not reading this. I just wanted to point out that the shift is really different when we not only do this collaborative, but we also provide these open tasks and allow for lots of mistakes. It's a paradigm shift. It changes it from this individualistic to a collaborative approach. We move away from there's a few good students at math in the class to we all have strengths and skills and talents that can be uplifted. It's very much, it feels a lot safer because people have their peers with them, and they're getting that peer support. Again, Denise showed this. I'm hoping as you're thinking through this that you're seeing direct connections. It's this relational learning. We're using lots of visuals. We're using our bodies and contexts that are meaningful for us. And I do want to share the first time that I started, before I get you to reflect, the first time that I started doing this, it was a grade 8 class. I had been trying to do different things to support math in a school for 2 years prior. And what I had been doing was like the removing of intervention groups. And I had one student, he's given me permission to share. His name was Garrett. And I worked with him in grade 6 and in grade 7. And I can say I did not help him at all, despite all of my best efforts. He happened to be in the classroom that I was first piloting this in. I have never before or since seen a student like his understanding and level of just like achievement, success, confidence, mathematical thinking jumped so high. It was unbelievable. And so I pulled him aside and I said, Garrett, I just want to talk to you about what's going on in math. And he looked at me and he says, I can do math now. And I said, I know. What happened? Like, why? And he said, because I got the help I needed the whole time. So it was like he was just getting that little bit of coaching and tutoring and support from his peers. And that's all he needed to just take off. So that to me was like, I was dabbling in this because I knew group work was probably the way to do it, but I had a real bias against it because of my own high school experience. And Garrett taught me that I needed to get over myself, and it wasn't about me, it was about the students. So as we leave you today, I just want to ask you a couple things to reflect upon. One, how might you utilize collaboration if you feel like jumping into the groups with roles feels like maybe unattainable? What about some structured partner talk? If you want to try the roles, it's a great time of year to try them. And you can reach out to me, Nikki at educatingnow.com, and I'm happy to send you resources for that. And then how might you tinker with a math task to open it up, right? So even if you're planning on using something from a textbook or worksheet, how might you shift it to make it something more like the Skittles? You can put that in the chat, or you can just take it away and think about it. Phew. All right.
Thank you, Nikki. That was amazing.
Everybody, we are just so grateful. Nikki, thank you for that, offering us a process and connecting it to trauma-informed practice. Christi, thank you for going deeper into what does it look like and what can we do. And both of you, thank you for thinking and describing children as capable and understanding that trauma is not part of who a child is. It's something that a child is contending with, and we can engage with all kids in a holistic way, even as we understand that the ways that we engage need to shift based on what they're navigating. And Denise, thank you for all of your support, not just in today's opening, but your leadership in this province in ensuring that we are honoring and attending to all Indigenous children. And that when we lift them up with these kinds of practices, we can lift up all children in ways that honor, respect them, and help them flourish. Each one of you, thank you for the work that you do. And we hope that as you finish the last 2 years, the last 2 months of the
Sometimes.
year, that you'll think about how do we move kids forward and recognize that wherever they are, they deserve this kind of nurturing, fun exploration, mentorship, and collaboration, and that they too can grow from wherever they are. Thanks, everyone, and have a fantastic evening.